Thanks for tuning in. Today we will be reading chapter 10 of the Christmasaurus, and chapter 10 is called What William Wants. That evening, William sat in his wheelchair at the dinner table in his wonky little home. Mr. Trundle had made him his favourite meal: golden, crummy, fishy fingers and crispy crunch potato waffles with baked beans. But to William it just looked like a rotten plateful of rottenness. "I'm not hungry, Dad," William said. "Can I go to bed early, please?" Mr. Trundle looked at William with that look that parents have when they're worried, but trying not to look worried. "Of course you can, my Willy Poos," said Mr. Trundle, trying to make William smile. "I hate it when you call me that, Dad. Why can't we just be like a normal family?" William snapped and wheeled himself away from the rotten dinner table, out of the stinking dining room, down the crummy hallway and into his rubbish bedroom, which was on the ground floor next to the living room. He parked his chair right next to his bed and pulled himself out so that he was sitting on top of his dinosaur patterned bed covers. He wriggled out of his clothes and put on his favourite pair of pyjamas, which of course were also dinosaur patterned, and slid his favourite bedtime story out from under his pillow, which was a very silly story about a dinosaur that pooped a planet. Since the day Brenda Payne had entered his life and made being in a wheelchair completely rotten, dinosaurs had been just about the only thing that could cheer William up. Just then, Mr. Trundle appeared in William's doorway, carrying a packet of William's favourite chocolate chip cookies and a large mug of warm milk. William's rotten levels dropped dramatically when he saw them. A few minutes later, they'd finished reading William's favourite silly book. The packet of biscuits was empty, and they were just starting to share the warm mug of milk when Mr. Trundle said, "Have you thought about what you're going to ask Santa for this year, William?" William wiped the milky moustache away from his lips and suddenly felt a little bit rotten again. "Oh, my dear boy, what on earth is wrong?" Mr. Trundle asked. "Well, it's just that I don't think Santa can get me what I want this year, Dad," William said sadly. Of course, Mr. Trundle had heard him say that before, but this year William wasn't staring longingly at his dinosaur posters. The emptiness in his stomach was telling him he wanted something far greater than that. William looked up at his dad. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, and then his eyes were caught by the empty air sitting next to Mr. Trundle. He finally looked down at his legs and sighed a deeply unhappy sigh. For the first time in his life, he was beginning to wish he wasn't the way he was, as though all the problems in the world came back around to one thing: his legs. Mr. Trundle tucked William into bed and pulled out a pen and William's favourite dinosaur notebook from the desk in the corner of the room. "Well, perhaps you're asking Santa for the wrong thing," Mr. Trundle said. "Before you go to sleep, I want you to have a think about what you really want this year and write your letter to Santa." William still felt a little troubled. There was something he wanted to say, but didn't quite know how to say it. Still, he knew that sometimes the hardest things to say are the most important ones, so he took a breath and said, "Dad?" "Yes, William," replied Mr. Trundle as he searched the packet of biscuits for any remaining crumbs. "Are you lonely?" asked William. Mr. Trundle paused in amazement. "My dear Willy Poos, William." "What on earth made you think that?" he said, a tiny wobble in his voice. "It's just that, well, I've been thinking it because you spend all your time looking after me because I am the way I am. And that's just the way I like it," said Mr. Trundle sharply. "But are you happy?" asked William, "like really happy?" "Happier than a bauble on a Christmas tree. Now I won't hear any more of this nonsense." They both sat quietly for a moment. William looked around his bedroom at the photos hanging on the wall and sitting on the shelf. They were all of just two people, him and his dad. "Now, there's time for one more story before bed. "What would you like?" Mr. Trundle asked. "The story you used to tell me about the elves and Santa and the North Pole," William said. His dad told the best. But as Mr. Trundle started talking, William's mind started wandering and wondering. Something that Brenda had said that day had stuck in his mind. "I bet he still believes in Santa." "What's on your mind, son?" asked Mr. Trundle. "Dad, this story, is it true? Is it real or make-believe?" asked William, almost as if he were scared to hear the answer. Mr. Trundle peered down at William through the round spectacles perched on his nose, which were also always dirty, and smiled softly as though he'd been expecting William to ask this exact question. "Now, William, that is a very good question," said Mr. Trundle as he made himself comfortable on William's bed. He put his hand over his heart, as he did whenever he was telling the truth. "I believe this story is true, therefore it is true," he said. "But how does that work?" questioned William, desperate to know more. "If I've never seen something, how do I know it's real?" "Ah, William, you've got it the wrong way round," said Mr. Trundle. "Believing has to come first. People who don't believe in things will never see those things. Believing is seeing." But William still looked uncertain. "But Dad, some kids at school don't believe in Santa. What if I believe he's real and someone else doesn't? If we both believe different things, then we can't both be right, can we?" asked William. Mr. Trundle thought for a moment, then suddenly picked up the mug and downed half the warm, creamy milk inside. He said, wiping his mouth. "Now, look inside this mug, and what do you see?" "Well, you've drunk half of it, so it's half empty now," said William, looking a little miffed that his dad had just slurped up so much of his delicious drink. "Are you sure?" asked Mr. Trundle. "Do you believe it's half empty?" "Yes, of course I believe it's half empty. I can see that it is," said William. "Well, I don't believe that at all," said Mr. Trundle, leaving William looking rather puzzled. Had his dad gone completely balmy? The mug was quite clearly half empty. It was plain as day. William was sure of it. "I believe something completely different," Mr. Trundle continued with a little smile. "I believe this mug of milk is not half empty. I believe it is half full." William looked at the half-empty mug of milk in front of him for a moment before realising that his dad might actually be right too. Even though he and his dad believed different things, they were both right. "You see, William, we both believe completely opposite things, but it doesn't mean that either of us is wrong. This mug is both half empty and half full at the same time," said Mr. Trundle, as William sat there with the expression of a young boy whose mind is in the process of being completely blown. "People believe all sorts of wild, wacky, weird and wonderful things, but it doesn't mean that anyone is wrong or that anyone is right. What is important isn't what is right or wrong, real, fake, true or false. What matters is that whatever you believe makes you happier, better person." William was listening closely. "But Dad, what if I believe in something that doesn't really exist? Aren't I believing in nothing?" he asked worriedly. "Believing in nothing is better than not believing in anything at all. Belief, William, is what makes the impossible possible, the undoable doable, and whatever you believe in, William, you will most definitely find. I believed in the milk and found it. You believed in the emptiness and found that. Neither of us was wrong, but none of us was happier." Mr. Trundle finished and gave the half-empty, half-full mug of milk to William. "Thanks, Dad," said William, and he gulped down the rest of the gloriously warm milk. He placed the mug full of emptiness on his bedside table and picked up the pen, ready to write his letter to Santa. Then he paused. paused. "So, Dad, if I really, really believe it, will there be one last chocolate chip cookie in that packet for me?" asked William with a cheeky grin, knowing full well that they'd eaten all the cookies. Mr. Trundle looked in the empty cookie packet and shook his head. "Oh, William, I think it would take a bit more than belief to make that happen." He leant over, placed one hand on William's pillow, and gave him a kiss goodnight. "Get some sleep after you finish that letter to Santa. You can take it to the post box in the morning," said Mr. Trundle. Just before he left William alone in his bedroom, he stopped at the door. "William, if you want me to be happy, then ask Santa for something that will make you happy," he said. "Something you've always wanted. Now good night, William." William sat thinking of something to ask Santa for. He thought and thought and thought. He thought so hard that it made his brain hurt a bit. As he looked around his room, his old dinosaur posters caught his eye. He stared at them, looking for inspiration, when suddenly his face started aching. He caught a glimpse of his reflection in his bedroom window and realised he was smiling. He hadn't seen that look on his face for quite some time. William knew exactly what he wanted from Santa. He started scribbling his letter, which looked like this. "Dear Santa, for Christmas this year, I would like a lot of things that you probably can't give, but a dinosaur would make me very happy. Merry Christmas, William Trundle." William folded the letter in half, popped it on his bedside table, and switched off his bedside light with the dinosaur lampshade. As he wriggled down under the covers and laid his head on his pillow, he felt something crumbling on his cheek. There, sitting on the pillow right next to his head, was one last chocolate chip cookie. William smiled and whispered, "Thanks, Dad," before gobbling it up and going to sleep. I will see you next time for chapter 11.